Now I wanted to introduce you to a fellow named Mason Mennenga, and he is an interesting character. I sort of forget, I've encountered him on Twitter, and he, I think, identifies as like a panentheist. I think that's right. Someone can correct me on that if I'm mistaken. But you see, he's got a YouTube following here. He's got some videos. And this one here, 5 things Christian apologists get wrong. We are going to review this. Now, I only watched roughly about the first 90 seconds, so I don't even know what the rest he's gonna say here. Let's put this into theater mode so it'll be a little bigger. And so really, the first 90 seconds aside, which I kind of quickly went through, I'm not sure what he's going to argue, but I can see that he's going to say, he's going to think that Christian apologetics gets 5 things wrong. And so let's see if we agree with him. My guess is, kind of knowing a little bit about him from Twitter, I'm going to disagree with quite a bit of what he's going to have to say. So let's walk through this together.
Christian apologists get many things wrong. They are often wrong about evolution. They are often wrong about the Bible. They are often wrong about Christianity itself. And they're even often wrong about genocide. In fact,
Okay, I already got to pause this. Let's go back. They're wrong about Christianity itself? I mean, that's just a plain assertion at this point in the conversation.
They are often wrong about the Bible. They are often wrong about Christianity itself. And they're even often wrong about genocide. In fact, I think the reason why it's called apologetics is because they have to apologize so much for being wrong. So Christian apologetics gets many things wrong.
Is, Mason, surely you know the Greek term apologia, and it is not about apologizing for saying sorry. Okay, it's a classic defense which people would give in a court of law. So you may have heard of classic works called apology. People are not saying that they are sorry. But
there are 5 things in particular they get wrong most. I'm Mason Mennenga, and today I'll be talking about 5 things Christian apologetics gets wrong.
He's not off to a good start.
Before we jump in, be sure to like and subscribe and turn on notifications. And let me know what you think about the video in the comments. Also, these videos take a lot of time and energy to make. So if you like my content,
it does. That's
be
true.
Sure to support me
Videos
on
like
Patreon
this take time.
at patreon.com/Mason Mennenga. Before talking about 5 things Christian apologetics gets wrong, let's first dive into what Christian apologetics even is.
Okay.
Essentially, Christian apologetics is the defense of Christianity. It tries to be the 1985 Bears defense when it's actually just a middle school football team.
Okay. He's bringing insults right away. He's not off to a good start. When we talk about our intellectual opponents, we want to try to paint them and describe them fairly. Now, in the internet world, this is called steel manning. When you present the best case of a specific position, we do not want to straw man. We don't want to create a caricature, a fake version of an argument or what someone's presenting. We want to steel man them. So, for example, I did this series called Misquoting Ehrman, where I defended the Darth Vader of the Christian apologetics world, because I think when Christian apologists were critiquing him, they were presenting straw men. So I kind of called him out on it. So I was steel manning Bart Ehrman's position. That's what we need to do in Christian apologetics. Mason himself is already not doing that when he attacks these apologists. So he's already going to be guilty of the very things he's accusing them of doing. So let's continue on here. We're a minute in, not off to a good start, Mason.
Taken many different forms over the years, but in its modern iteration, many apologists use philosophical and pseudoscientific defenses of the Christian faith to basically prove that Christianity is the correct religion. They use arguments like the watchmaker defense, which says that if you found something as complex as a watch in nature,
William Paley's watchmaker argument,
the only logical conclusion you could make is that a watchmaker must exist to have made the watch.
Okay, that's unclear how he's already answered that. The only logical conclusion. That is not... So, there's a couple ways you can take the watchmaker argument. You can take it as an argument via analogy, and an analogy is either strong or weak. It's not the only possible answer, okay? So, it's either strong or weak as an analogy, Paley would argue that it's a strong analogy for representing the world around us. So you could embrace, some alternative position. Another way of viewing Paley's argument is as a sort of an abductive argument to the best explanation. Okay, now when you do that, you're comparing one explanation against other explanations. And the other explanations can be the most logical, but not the only logical. Okay? So right there, it's just that little term, only logical. That right there is not a steelman of Paley's argument.
So that means that because the world is complex, then a God must exist to have made the world. Other apologists use creationist pseudoscience, like that humans didn't evolve from apes, to prove that God created the world in 6 literal days, even if it looks like your grandparents themselves.
Okay, so he's just talking about young earth creationists here. This is Ken Ham. A lot of the Christian apologists I know are old earth creationists. Some of them that I know are theistic evolutionists and do affirm evolution. So he's just kind of giving the worst of the worst here.
Or apes. So that's a brief primer on Christian apologetics. So let's get into the first thing that Christian apologetics gets wrong.
And let me clarify what I said. When I say he's given the worst of the worst, I mean referring to Ken Ham. There are people who defend young earth creationism and do so from a more scholarly approach rather than Ham's wanting arguments. So and wanting rhetoric as well. Ham is of the position that if you deny the flood or deny young earth creationism, that you're not a Christian. So he's sort of the worst of the worst.
The first thing Christian apologetics gets wrong is that it has a very narrow understanding.
Hang on, let's see here.
The first thing Christian apologetics gets wrong is that it has a very narrow understanding of Christianity. Christianity is a 2,000-year-old religion that has spanned the entire planet. It looks and believes and is practiced differently wherever it is.
That's true.
If you are interested in learning more about the diversity of Christianity, check out my video on that here. Modern-day Christian apologetics especially is predicated on Christianity essentially being either conservative Catholic or evangelical. But there are so many other kinds of Christianity, even today, than conservative Catholicism and evangelicalism. Just like there is so much more other music than just Taylor Swift. Talking to you, Swifties. Like I mentioned before, one common Christian apologetics argument is creationism. Creationism is an...
Okay, so the narrow understanding of Christianity, as he's presented it so far, I don't really take issue with. I would nuance it, though. When I say I don't take issue, I don't object to his point in principle. I would nuance what he's saying, though, because there are, in the diversity of Christian denominations across the globe, there are apologists. Now, they might not formally identify as an apologist, but there are people who would talk about the rationality and reasonableness of their faith. And this might not be formal argumentation like a philosopher would give, but it might still occur as a personal testimony, for example. And so in this sense, there are apologists in these other denominations. So maybe what Mason's going to critique here is American evangelical apologetics. So he needs to be a little bit more narrow in the, what his target is exactly of what he's attacking.
An idea almost only found in conservative evangelicalism. Basically, no other Christian tradition throughout history
he says conservative evangelicalism. I would attach American conservative evangelicalism.
Believed in a literal 6-day creation account. And many Christian traditions throughout Christian history have not cared about intellectually defending themselves, which is the whole point of Christian apologetics. Christian apologetics benefits both from Christians.
Let me rewind that a little. See what he said about people that didn't care to defend.
Throughout Christian history found in conservative evangelicalism. Basically, no other Christian tradition throughout history has ever believed in a literal 6-day creation account. And many Christian traditions...
That's likely false.
Throughout Christian history...
I mean, we could find church fathers, for example.
...have not cared about intellectually defending themselves.
Oh!
Which is the whole point of Christian apologetics.
Definitely wrong. Let's replay that.
Creation account. And many Christian traditions throughout Christian history have not cared about intellectually defending themselves, which is the whole point of Christian apologetics.
Mason, you are most assuredly wrong on this. Go read the Church Fathers. Go read Justin Martyr's Apology. Seriously, go read it. That statement you said there, demonstrably false. There are other traditions that have talked about the intellectual defense of the faith. Where do you place Anselm? Where do you place these other church fathers? How about Athanasius on the Incarnation? He was an African bishop. You think he's a conservative American evangelical? No, that's a category error. You can't place him in the contemporary category. What you said there about these other traditions haven't cared about the intellectual defense of the faith is wrong.
Christian apologetics benefits both from Christians and even atheists who only know of Christian apologetics, because it makes Christian apologetics the normative Christianity for those Christians and atheists. But Christianity is so much more than the Christianity of Christian apologetics. Christianity isn't just about a bunch of intellectual arguments needed to be defended.
That is true. Christianity is far more than just the arguments needing to be defended. I'll even go further than Mason. Christianity is far more than merely the assent to a select list of propositional truths or propositional beliefs. It's more than that.
This is why it's so important for other kinds of Christians to live out our faith in completely different ways than the argumentative way many Christian apologists do. Because Christian faith is meant to be lived in love, not defended in arguments.
True, but let's also be clear that Mason's presenting arguments here. So he's also doing the very thing that he kind of critiques. So he can't help but not do it, right? He cannot help but present arguments critiquing a certain version of Christians that present arguments. In this way, his video is a bit self-defeating, but he is making some other good points therein. Let's continue. He's almost done with that, I think.
The second thing Christian apologetics gets wrong is that the question about the existence of God is a scientific question that can be proven. For many Christian apologists, and even many atheists, the question of if God exists is some kind of science question that can be proven.
Huh? Wait a second. He's using some terms and he hasn't defined them here. I don't know of any formal, proper, professional Christian apologists that would say scientifically proven in the sense that we would use the scientific method and form a proof using chemistry. We can look to science, which presents evidence for philosophical propositions about God's existence, but I wouldn't word it the way that Mason has, and I'm not sure that other Christian apologists would either.
This is one of my points in my video about what atheists get wrong about theism, which you can check out here. Christian apologists and some atheists seem to believe that if you can just find the right scientific evidence, then God can either be proven or disproven. But the problem is the question of the existence of God is not a scientific question, because existence isn't simply a scientific thing.
Yes.
The question of God's existence is a metaphysical question, not a scientific one.
I
know
agree.
When I say metaphysical, I do not mean buying some crystals at a store. Instead, metaphysical means what you believe to be the fundamental nature of reality. Everyone, including atheists, have a belief about the fundamental nature of reality. Think of it this way. Regardless if you are a theist
I've got no issue here with
atheist,
Mason.
I am sure you would say love exists. But how would you ever prove that love exists? Yeah, you can run some tests and experiments that maybe acts out of love, but they aren't love themselves. There's no way to prove or disprove the existence of love, because love is simply an experience.
Okay, I would disagree with how he phrased that. Listen to this again.
That maybe acts out of love, but they aren't love themselves. There's no way to prove or disprove the existence of love.
There's no way to prove or disprove the existence of love.
Because love is simply an experience.
Because love is an experience. Now, you could present evidence for love, right? So in this sense, you could prove with an argument. Now, you might not be able to scientifically prove love, but you could present a philosophical argument for love's existence.
Got that, Hadaway? It is likely something that
I don't get that reference. Sorry if that's a pop culture
based on your
thing.
Experience of reality. In other words, love is metaphysical because you likely believe it is a part of reality. In the same way, God is also not able to be proven or disproven scientifically, because if God does exist, then God would not be testable like some lab rat, because God's existence is a question of metaphysics, not science. And many Christian apologists get this wrong because they argue that if we can just find the right scientific evidence, then that will somehow prove God exists.
Well, scientific evidence can be used in support of a philosophical proposition or philosophical argument. So yeah, we don't want to use a category error in that we want to scientifically find God, but we can look for evidence for God. That's the way I would describe it. So he says some good things here. Some other things I'm not sure he says correctly. Maybe he'll get back to me here and say, no, here's what I meant. And that'll be okay. We'll see what he says. Okay, number 3. And we get an ad. Thanks, YouTube. And if you want to skip these ads and not see them at Veracity Hill, become one of our financial supporters, and we'll buy YouTube Red if that's what it's called. That's what it used to be called. YouTube Premium, I think, is what it's called now. And that way we don't have to watch any ads anymore.
Similarly to believing God's existence is a scientific question, the third thing that Christian apologetics gets wrong is that if somehow God was proven to exist, then that God would be the Christian understanding of God. Something that would be hilarious to me is, let's say somehow Christian apologists were actually able to prove God exists. They have worked tirelessly for centuries to prove God exists, and now they are ready to prove to the world that Christianity is the one correct and true religion. And it turns out the God who exists is one of the Hindu gods. Can you imagine the anger and disappointment? Even though I'm a Christian, it would bring me no greater joy than to see William Lane Craig in such anger and disappointment. Now, obviously, there is work in...
Okay, a couple things here. One, my sneeze went away. But let's replay that here.
Than to see William Lane Craig religion. And it turns out the God who exists is one of the Hindu gods. Can you imagine the anger and disappointment?
So let's follow along here. What Mason is saying is, well, let's suppose that we could prove that God exists, but lo and behold, it's not the Christian God, it's the Hindu God. Let's do this hypothetical, okay? Now let's hear what he says.
Even though I'm a Christian, it would bring me no greater joy than to see William Lane Craig in such anger and disappointment.
I'm sorry, Mason. You're a Christian, and it would bring you great joy to see another Christian in anger and disappointment? No. Shame on you, Mason. That is not the Christian approach here. So, something like that really ticks me off because he would take joy and satisfaction out of someone who is anger and sorrowful. This is not the appropriate response. And to me, this indicates that Mason has some personal issues in his life because he would feel this joy over someone else's suffering. God takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked, okay, to quote the scriptures. Likewise, we should do the same. And here Mason is publicly saying he would have joy over another Christian, a brother in Christ, being angry and sorrowful. That's messed up.
Now, obviously, there is work in Christian apologetics that tries to prove specifically Christian claims, like that Jesus resurrected from the dead. But the argument that God exists in Christian apologetics is funny because it implies the God they believe exists and they try to prove exists is their Christian God. But it's just as easily possible that if God does exist, it could be a Hindu God or some other kind of God, which would in turn disprove so many of their other claims and arguments. So Christian apologetics makes a big leap of faith that the God they believe they are proving is their understanding of God and not some other God.
Okay. So, I don't know how much studying of the philosophy of religion or apologetic methodology that Mason has done, because when you study apologetic methodology, you're going to learn that the classical approach to apologetics, one of the methodologies called the classical approach, presents a two-step case. One, arguing for the existence of God, and step number 2 is that God is the Christian God. So, I don't know why Mason is sort of blending this idea that, well, if we just prove God exists, therefore Christianity is true. No, apologists, maybe Mason is trying to give his observations on his personal experience, but he should read more of the literature on apologetic methodology. Maybe he's encountered Reformed presuppositionalists who would try to make that claim, but other methodologies, Reformed epistemology, classical approach, evidentialism, they do not commit that logical assumption. So maybe he's just responding to Reformed presuppositionalists that are apologists. But so he's got to nuance it. So, all right, we're going to disagree with that third point. A little careless. I think a little bit of 1 and most of 2 I agreed with. Everything else a little off. So we've got 2 points left here.
The fourth thing that Christian apologetics gets wrong is their belief that the Bible has to be interpreted literally as fact in order for it to be true.
Hey, look at that. We already dealt with this early in the program, looking at the state of theology, how some passages like the parables of Jesus are not literally true. So let's see what Mason says.
Or why the Bible doesn't have to be taken literally true, more in this video here. But basically, things being literal fact aren't the only way we know things are true. Have you ever read a poem that changed the way you viewed life? Or have you ever listened to a Smash Mouth song that moved you to tears?
Whoa,
just because
Mason,
a novel or
that's a big jump. When people say that the Bible's literally true, they're not saying it's the only way we can have any knowledge. They would say we can have knowledge of truths outside of Scripture. So this is clearly a non sequitur. What you just said does not follow from the previous thing that you said.
Song isn't some literal fact doesn't mean it isn't true. Truth is not just about the factualness of something. And that is what is great about the Bible. It is filled with so many stories that are not trying to account the historical or scientific factualness of an event.
That would be appropriate
the stories of the Bible are trying to tell us a truth about God or the world or both. And many Christians throughout Christian history have understood the Bible just like that. They haven't needed the stories in the Bible to be fact in order for the Bible to reveal truth. It wasn't until the Enlightenment
I agree there.
that some Christians...
So far, now what you're saying is great, but that first thing you said after you introduced the topic is totally off topic.
Christians started interpreting the Bible literally as fact because many of these Christians felt the advancement of science in the Enlightenment competed with their Christian beliefs. But there are still many Christians today who don't interpret the stories of the Bible as literal fact in order for it to reveal truths. Many Christian apologists get the Bible wrong when they insist that the Bible must be interpreted as literal facts in order for it to be true. Because we all know that just because the lyrics of All Star aren't literal fact doesn't mean that only shooting stars break the mold isn't true.
I am here to tell you today
another
your
ad.
feelings are valid.
Support
Your
Veracity
trauma
Hill
is
so we can get
valid.
YouTube
Your hurt
Premium.
is your...
The fifth and final, and possibly the worst thing that Christian apologetics get wrong, is that the theory of evolution disproves God. It is so frustrating that after Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species, that many Christians thought that such a theory disproves the existence of God, when it most certainly doesn't address the existence of God at all. Now, if you already believe that the world came to exist in 6 literal days, then the theory of evolution probably throws a wrench in your argument that God exists. And it probably throws a wrench in being taken seriously by anyone. However...
Okay, we'll stop Mason here because I'm in general agreement here that someone could affirm theistic evolution and believe that God guided the process. Now, I'm not saying that that's my view. I think there are arguments for and against it out there in the literature, but I think it is compatible. I don't think it's incompatible with Christian theism. So now there's going to be debates over how to interpret Genesis. I get that. I'm not quite interested in participating in those debates because I know for some people it's a total rabbit hole. But I generally agree with him here about his critique. But this is only a subset of Christian apologists, as I previously said. There are only a subset of Christian, maybe even a minority today, who would say that you cannot hold to theistic evolution and be a Christian. So generally I'm in agreement with him there. I think he was sort of careless in a number of the ways that he phrased things. Although I found myself in general agreement with a couple of these points, I think they require further nuance and further consideration, but also that we need to steel man our opponents. And so when we're going to critique apologetics, if you're going to attack a subset, then attack the subset. Say, there are some Christian apologists that believe this. Don't say all of them think that, because then you're just painting with broad strokes, and your argument, your critique is false when you do that. So, Mason, if I had to suggest, I would recommend that you remake this video, edit the script, and redo it to more fairly critique the world of Christian apologetics, or critique a subset of Christian apologetics. But the way you've said some of these things, were non sequiturs, were straw man, and categorical errors as well. So I think there's some work that needs improving on this video. But I'd be happy to participate in a conversation. As followers of Veracity Hill know, I enjoy the civil discourse that can occur between people who disagree. So I'd welcome you on to Veracity Hill. We could have a conversation about this video itself if you'd like. But in the meantime, that's it for this episode of Screeching or Teaching, as I forgot to introduce the segment. But really, this is Screeching or Teaching, where I look at a Christian thinker, an influencer, who presents maybe assertions about Christianity or Christian apologetics in this case. Sometimes we might look at theology like we did last week. We looked at Dan McClellan looking at the divinity of Jesus that was in question by Dan. And so here we've looked at 5 things Christian apologetics gets wrong by Mason Mennenga. And I really think that the video needs further work. I'm certainly far from persuaded by it. And I've given some reasons why that is. And unfortunately, he's, made some broad attacks. And I think that's a little unfair even to his audience for him to do that. And sadly then, as he was critiquing apologetics as, this presentation of arguments for Christianity, he's doing the same thing. I already mentioned this, but he's presenting arguments against Christian apologetics. That's what this video is. It's generally speaking an argument against it. And so he can't help but do the same thing. He is an apologist for his position. So it's how we do apologetics, right? It's how we talk about a reasonable defense of the Christian worldview. That's what's important. So some of his criticisms are well taken, but I found it quite wanting. I think that Dan McClellan's video from last week was a little more thorough, polished, thoughtful, not as off the cuff, even though Mason's appears to be scripted, I think, if you're looking at his eyes.